Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin, and we're happy to be your guides for this limited series.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Join us on this journey to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Patrick Wolf, the Interim Department Head, Distinguished Professor of Education Policy, and 21st Century Endowed Chair in the School Choice at the University of Arkansas. With a diverse career path that includes roles as a lobbyist for people with hearing impairments, a state government administrator, and even a pizza deliverer, Dr. Wolf brings a wealth of experience to the field of education reform. As the principal investigator of the School Choice Demonstration Project, he led the impact evaluation of the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program and oversaw a national research team conducting an independent evaluation of the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. Throughout his prolific research, he has authored and co-authored over 200 academic works on school choice, civic values, special education, and more. Not surprisingly, his research has been featured in major media outlets such as NPR, ABC World News Tonight, CNN, and the New York Times. A graduate of the University of St. Thomas and Harvard University, Patrick's contributions to education policy are both extensive and impactful. And over the last year, I've had the privilege of engaging with him on numerous different occasions. So, Patrick, we're excited to have you and appreciative of the time you're going to share with us today. We're talking about quality, what it looks like in education, what it looks like outside of education. I'm curious to sort of get us started from your perspective. Is quality in education standard? Is there a universal definition of what quality looks like? If there is, or if there is not, will you share with us what your thoughts are?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart and that I've struggled with in my 30-year career as a scholar. Because in my early studies, I really emphasized the test score effects of school choice interventions. That was our measure of effectiveness for these programs. But I soon came to realize that test scores are very limited as a single standardized measure of quality in education for a number of reasons. I mean, the first reason is that test score levels really reflect primarily what students bring to school in terms of their native intelligence and the supports that they are receiving from their home, and not really very much what the school itself is delivering to them. If you use gain scores, that's a much better metric of school performance and educational quality. But still, it's only capturing what can be captured and measured on a particular test. And even when you think about a particular test being a decent barometer of learning gains, we ask schools to do so much more than just promote learning in students. We need them to promote the social skills and socialization of students. We need them to instill good habits in students of conscientiousness and grit. And we need them to impart strong civic values to young people so that they will be effective citizens. So the scope of what K-12 education is all about is quite broad, and test score levels and even test score gains really only capture a sliver of what we should be evaluating schools on.
Yeah, so Patrick, you talk a little bit about that sliver, those test scores, and maybe what most folks probably think of is kind of your math and reading, maybe ELA, if people are familiar with that acronym, English language arts. But you felt like that wasn't maybe holistic enough, right? And so you've now turned your attention to civic engagement and citizenship. So why don't you talk a little bit about that shift? And I'm really curious as to like what made you interested in these citizenship outcomes. I know it's something that just reading the news lately, I read and I go, oh, um, there does seem to be a breakdown and just kind of like civil discourse. I wonder if that was something that was top of mind for you as well. But how'd you come to this as opposed to just your reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Sure. Well, I'm a political scientist by training. I mean, I'm really a pizza deliverer by training, but in terms of my academic training, my academic discipline is political science. And I always thought one of the most interesting aspects of political science was the subfield of political psychology,
Mm.
where scholars have grappled with how we measure key civic outcomes like tolerance and civility. So at the same time, recently in the private school choice debate, there has been a lot of inflammatory rhetoric about private school choice being a threat to democracy. And so I assembled a team, a terrific team of former and current graduate students of mine, and we set out to determine what does the evidentiary base say about the effect of private schooling and private school choice on critical civic outcomes, including political tolerance, political knowledge, political engagement, and civic engagement. Um, so we conducted what's called a meta-analysis, a study of the studies, and identified 57 empirical studies of the association between private schooling and one or more of those civic outcomes. It ended up that we were able to collect 531 different statistical findings about private schooling and civic outcomes. And on average, those findings were of a positive effect of private schooling compared to public schooling on these important markers of citizenship. It was especially strong for political tolerance and for political knowledge. It was somewhat weaker for civic engagement, and it really was kind of a tie on political involvement through voting and registering to vote. But across the board, for the most part, private schooling has shown to be a positive force for shaping the next generation of citizens.
So it's interesting to hear you sort of talk about all those different parts. I almost look at it like if I were to visualize it, you know, on one circle, there's these different knots, and all of what you just described are different factors in that. In my mind, we have civil discourse, civil engagement, people's participation in civics, in society, inherently then creates the type of society in which we all live. Hopefully, it would be higher quality with more participation, with more engagement, with more invested. We'd get a higher quality engagement. If we were to back it up a step further to the education side of things, are there things that need to be happening in any of the places people and children go to school that allow for those factors and outcomes to take place?
Sure. I mean, that's the $64,000 question, right? Is what kind of educational ecosystem is
Hmm.
going to promote better civic values and civic outcomes for young people? And I think one important element of it is what Ashley Berner at Johns Hopkins University calls educational pluralism.
Hmm.
It's the recognition that there isn't just one way to school students. It is sort of a pushback against this whole idea of standardization and over standardization of education. But it's pitched really at the institution level, at the school level, and Ashley's argument is that it's actually consistent with our vision, the American vision of self-government, to have educational pluralism, to allow parents to select from among a variety of different types of distinctive schools to find the one that best fits their child's needs. And these ideas of parental authority and choice are also fully consistent with our vision for active citizenship in our society. Citizens making choices, selecting their representatives, voting, participating in referenda. So a key element of self-government. It likely is problematic if you take that kind of parental agency out of shaping a child's education. It's likely to create parents who are much more passive and are basically allowing the state to basically run their child's education, as opposed to being a much more active participant in that education. So parental empowerment through school choice likely has spillover effects in terms of parental empowerment in executing the responsibilities of citizenship. So that's I think one element is parental choice. I think another key element is the courage of schools to discuss controversial issues with young people, especially high schools. High school level, students are becoming their own people, and they should learn about what social and political issues are controversial, are important, are of high salience. They should engage on those issues. They should learn how to take a position on an issue that's the opposite of their own preferred position
Completely.
and defend it and debate it, and in that way respect and appreciate opinions on the other side. A lot of high schools aren't doing that, especially public high schools, because they want to avoid controversy. But controversy is in the essence of self-government and political pluralism. And we have to learn how to engage on these issues, and young people need to learn how to engage on these issues without demonizing the opposition.
How does that happen from your perspective?
So I think it happens in a couple of ways. One is, I think one of the foundations for this, I mentioned choice as a foundation, but also I think another foundation is just the idea that private schools of choice and charter schools of choice are voluntaristic communities where people come together of their own free will to engage in the educational project. I think people feel safer to engage on controversial issues when they're in a voluntaristic community like a school. So I think that element helps. As I mentioned, I think just like setting up debates. When I was in 8th grade, we had a big 8th grade high school debate. The topic was capital punishment. I was randomly assigned to defend capital punishment. Well, I'm opposed to capital punishment personally, but I did the best I could to defend it as a criminal justice issue, a criminal justice policy. And I went on to be a high school debater as well, where, with classic high school debate, when you're on the affirmative, you might be arguing for airbags in automobiles. I'm dating myself, right? But when you flip and you're on the negative, you're arguing against it. so you're saying the exact opposite. And I think it helps people learn, that idea that you don't have to be entrenched in your positions. You can see and appreciate arguments on the other side. And also, it's really important that schools impress upon students that we need to engage in controversial issues with civility and with respect for the dignity of other people who think differently than we do.
Hmm.
And I think, this is where private schools have an advantage because many of them have religious affiliations. So they have a strong values ethos in their school ecology, and I think in a rich values environment, there is strong support of the respect for human dignity and civility. And such. So creates the conditions where these pedagogical approaches can really take root and deliver effective civic values and dispositions for kids.
Patrick, this is really interesting to me, and I think it's something that's probably not um, intuitive for a lot of people. And that is, we often hear this idea, kind of maybe a knee jerk reaction or assumption, that private schools are more insular and therefore insulated from the outside world, right? That you're more likely to get an education that is so narrow that it doesn't take diverse perspectives into account. But you're saying something very different, that in some ways that the mission and the orientation of at least many private schools, or maybe private schools as a sector, or choice schools as a sector, that allows for an ecosystem where people and students in particular, and faculty, feel more freedom to discuss hot topic issues. um, I think that's really counter to what a lot of people, would assume. You hear often that folks think public schools are, I've heard this phrase, the bedrock of democracy, and sort of part and parcel to the U.S. education system, though that hasn't always been the case, of course, we know. So I think that is a real insight to me from your work. Yeah.
So I'm going to share a story from higher education that I think reflects on that point, Shaka. When I started as a junior faculty member at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., it's a Catholic Jesuit university. They were renovating the main buildings where classrooms were. The main classroom buildings at Georgetown were being renovated that summer. And prior to the renovation, they removed all the crucifixes from the walls in the classrooms where they typically would hang. When the classrooms were ready after the renovation, there was a big controversy about should we reinstall the crucifixes or not. There were some faculty members and some student organizations that were opposed to rehanging the crucifixes because they felt that was being intolerant and not being sufficiently inclusive of the Georgetown students who are not Catholic.
Hmm.
The debate raged, and it looked like the pro crucifix folks were going to lose until the president of the Jewish Student Association and the president of the Muslim Student Association held a rally in favor of reinstalling the crucifixes in the classroom.
Wow.
And what they said is, they said, we have deep religious beliefs and deep religious convictions. They are different from those of the Catholic Church, but we respect other people who have deep religious convictions. And we know Georgetown is a Catholic university. It should be that.
Right.
Right.
So again, it's sort of counterintuitive and runs counter
Right.
to a lot of sort of liberal political thought, and is kind of more communitarian, you might say, if we want to get into the weeds on political theory. It's a much more communitarian perspective, but people who have strong value systems oftentimes are actually more tolerant of people who have different value systems, because at least they understand what it means to stand for something.
That's right. Well, it reminds me of a controversy from some years ago in France, where there was this question about, well, what does it mean to be French? And I think that question even is a very French question. What does it mean to be French, sort of qua French? but it became an issue because of the large number of Muslim immigrants. And so the question in France became, well, is there a religious expression issue with um, women wearing a hijab, say at the beach, right, or just around? And there were some people who said, "Well, that's not very French," quote. And then there were others that said, "Well, we want to be a sort of pluralistic society where people from any faith can practice their beliefs, in earnest, right?" And so there is this risk of believing that you're being value neutral, but in fact, that could just suppress ideas and suppress free expression and speech. It's super super interesting um, uh, example from Georgetown. Thanks for sharing that.
And I'll just add that Charles Glenn, the former dean of the Ed School at Boston University, has a wonderful line about this. It's like if we try and exclude all the deeply held positions and values from the school sector, from the educational environment, because we don't want to offend anyone, all we are left with is the bland leading the bland.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds right.
One of the things that this is making me think about, this discussion of community, participation in community, how oftentimes the education environment reflects the community in which it sits, et cetera, et cetera. Patrick, something you and I have talked about before is this notion of zip codes affecting education. And there's a lot of different ways it can do so. For example, oftentimes people say, they might not consider themselves a proponent of school choice, yet they chose to live in a specific zip code because it allowed their kids to participate in a specific school. There in large, you absolutely are not only a participant in school choice, but you have participated in the act of choosing a school simply by choosing where you're living. If communities are shaping the education systems and schools in which they sit, what are your thoughts on the qualities, the quality of life, the quality of conversation, the quality of citizens that exist in a certain community, then determining the quality of the school in that zip code? Can you share?
Yeah, so residential school zones have completely outlived their usefulness, and I think they are now a destructive force in education. Now, originally, they built community because under the Northwest Ordinance of 1785, when a new area was settled by European pioneers, they they allocated the center portion of the plot for a public school, and that was an arrangement that built community, and everyone in that town then would go to that public school. As our towns got bigger, residential zones separated communities and segregated communities, and so it's now got to the point where people tend to live in neighborhoods that are reflective of their race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status. So if we assign them to schools based on those neighborhoods, we are just reinforcing and concentrating those characteristics. And that's why it's been so difficult in the modern era to build ethnically and income diverse public schools, because the residential zones completely undermine it. So I think residential zones have to go. Parents should be free to enroll their child in whatever public or private school is the best fit for them. There will be some stratification when that happens, but at least it's not being forced by the government. It's not being forced by circumstances. It's based on the free decisions of parents. And a lot of times you'll get some very healthy racial and income mixing when you have these really distinctive schools. I mean, there are a lot of low income parents who like Montessori schools. So you create a Montessori school, you're not just going to get rich kids in that school. You're not just going to get white kids in that school. You're going to get kids whose parents like the Montessori model. And so the thematic aspect of private and charter schools and in the public sector, magnet schools as well, can be a source for better integration and mixing of students who are all attracted by the distinctiveness of the particular school. And of course, that's a huge push against the idea of standardization and
Mhm.
cookie cutter schools that look the same and operate the same for everybody.
Patrick, as our time is sort of winding down, I have a question that may feel a little bit like a challenge, but I know you're up for the task. I am curious as to what you might say to folks who say, "All right, well, you're focused on citizenship, civic values among choice schools, but that's shifting the goalposts. Shouldn't it's we're talking about education, shouldn't we just be talking about academics? Shouldn't we just be talking about reading, writing, arithmetic? How do you respond to that? Because you've studied lots of different outcomes and measures of quality in education. So, what might you say to the person that says, "Well, this is just a reinvention to show the benefits of your proposed policy solution without taking academics head on"? How do you respond to that?
So, Shaka, I mean, I still look at the test score effects of school choice interventions whenever those data are available. I think that information is important. Parents like to receive information about test scores and test score effects, but it's not even close to the most important information that parents value in terms of determining whether school is working, a particular school is working for their child. When you survey parents about that, they care much more about the extent to which the child is engaged in school, is developing effective disciplinary habits, is aspiring to complete high school and go on to college. So these sort of non-test score effects of schooling are much more important to parents, and they are much more important to parents for good reason, because
Mhm.
those kinds of outcomes are more strongly associated with positive life outcomes for kids. So yes, we should look at the effects of schooling on student achievement, particularly using growth scores, not just levels. But we should also look at the effect that a school has on a student's mental health, on their social skills, on these other really important non-cognitive factors. Parents value those; they really matter for students, and certainly the civic outcomes matter dramatically for our country.
I'll just say, yeah, turns out that as a parent, I care far more about whether or not my daughters grow up to be good people than whether or not they can memorize the periodic table. Turns out, right?
Patrick, we could keep going these conversations no matter where we are, no matter who's in the room. You bring such tremendous knowledge, historical knowledge, but relevant awareness for all the things and the topics you're discussing. So we really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. And we're hopeful that not only have you just enlightened Shaka and myself and our way of thinking about quality as it pertains to education, as it pertains to the worlds in which we live, but we know that you'll be able to impart your wisdom on a lot of other people as well. So, very grateful for you taking the time this morning to share with us. And yeah, we look forward to doing it again, hopefully soon.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Patrick.